So I've been meaning to do an in-depth deep dive into the Inbetweeners for quite some time now. And this was going to be a video that dove into the Inbetweeners show, Superbad, the Inbetweeners movie, the road trip documentary did, the Jimmy Carr reunion they did. Just sort of look at the show's legacy and why it stands out as such a great TV comedy landmark. But for this video, I watched both the first and second movie, and I feel like I've got enough to say about both of them that it can make its own video. I've also had a fair bit going on in the past 36 hours, so I just feel like this is a bit more manageable at the moment. I sort of wanted to do a deep dive into why these movies work when they work and why these movies fail when they fail. I think it's actually quite interesting to look at how some things are lost in translation even when the same writers are involved, when it switches from a TV show format to a movie format. In theory, these movies should have just been 90-minute episodes of Inbetweeners that just knocked it out of the park. The writing alone in the show is so snappy and so precise and so intelligent.
You know your testicle's sticking out. What?
Is that why everyone was laughing?
Suppose you thought that was funny, did you? Well, your little joke's got you in a lot of trouble.
Honestly, it wasn't a joke.
No, there is nothing funny about testicles, Cooper, as you'll discover tomorrow in my office.
What? Sorry, sir, that sounds a bit weird.
No, it didn't.
In theory, these movies should have just been a slam dunk. Could have just been the boys talking and riffing off each other, and I think it would have made for great 90-minute movies. But I think where these movies sort of falter is they get lost in the ambition of trying to be a movie, trying to give these TV characters movie-level arcs. And also, I think the movie gets really lost in sort of the spectacle of the higher budget. To what made the show work. Maybe it is a bit unfair to compare some things from a TV show to some things to a movie in terms of structure and presentation because they are inherently different. My main issue with these movies aren't particularly things that are exclusive to movies, however. It just feels like what they've done with the characters in these two movies kind of spits in the face of what the Inbetweeners as a show represented. So without further ado, we're going to start with the deep dive. So I'm going to get what I actually like about these movies out of the way. We'll start with the first one. The fascinating thing about the first movie is it almost feels like a swan song to the TV show. I think they could have cut it off with this first movie and they would have been fine. I do like that in this movie, a lot of what they would have got away with in high school, they don't get away with in the real world. It sort of shows how high school can be very echo chambery, and then when you get out into the real world, you do feel alone. And the interesting part of this is that in the TV show, they were definitely defined as losers. They were the Inbetweeners, right? They weren't exactly cool and they weren't exactly the total social outcasts, but they just didn't fit in. While they were the butt of a lot of jokes in high school, however, they did have a friendship that sort of transcended that. I think being grounded in a high school setting sort of allowed for this controlled chaos for this group. They sort of enjoyed helping each other and laughing at each other's failures at different points. The most fascinating dynamic that I found the movie explored is sort of this idea that, like, even though they weren't cool in high school, a lot of the stuff that they got away with, they can't get away with now, and it's really frowned upon. The main thing I do like about this movie is it does add some heart to the characters that we didn't get previously. There's a lot this movie adds in sort of rounding off our characters, but I think the main strength and the main takeaway that you get from this movie is some actual dramatic weight that maybe wasn't fully present in the show.
I stopped believing in God when I realised it was just dog backwards. And then after that, I just stopped worrying about stuff. You only get one go round, I reckon. When you're dead, you're dead. So you can spend your time thinking about how things haven't gone perfect, or you can just get on with it, have a laugh and that. That's what I do. I'm pretty happy. You are, aren't you? Yeah.
I'm thinking sort of the scene where Neil explains his DOG, GOD metaphor. You know, Neil goes on this speech that once he realized that God was just DOG spelt backwards, he stopped believing in God and just started looking at life and take it day by day. And as a result, he's quite happy. And that sort of imparts some wisdom onto Will to just stop giving a fuck. Another scene that I think holds some dramatic weight is when Jay and Simon are confronted by Carly's like Booker boyfriend. Right, so for some reason I could only find TikTok like thirst edits of Theo James for this clip, but basically these thirst edits show how violent he gets against Jay and Neil.
Oh, good one. Fuck you, you lanky prick.
Theo James from White Lotus is quite a physically intimidating actor. His delivery here when he gets up in Jay and Neil's face is very uncomfortable and genuinely feels like there's stakes involved. He feels like a violent threat. I admire this scene because I don't think it's meant to be played for laughs. It's meant to be a really uncomfortable moment. I have to give the film a lot of credit here. It feels like watching someone you really care about or your high school friends getting their ass handed to them, and just how uncomfortable that feels. At the time, they're wearing incredibly misogynistic shirts and they're shown to be absolutely vile throughout the whole movie. This scene manages to really humanize Jay and Neil and makes you feel really, really bad. And it's just a really powerful moment in an otherwise goofy movie. I also must say, I do actually respect what they did with the sort of female foil characters to the Inbetweeners. We're introduced to a set of 4 women and each one is paired off with one of the Inbetweeners to various sexual and romantic capacities. It is very Alvin and the Chipmunks to the Squeakquel, where there's the female foils to the male chipmunks. I think what makes this dynamic so interesting, it brings up serious character flaws out of these characters that we've grown to really love despite their problems, and it throws them into question. So prime example would be Jay. I think intelligent viewers that engage with the Inbetweeners on a level more than just penis jokes sort of start to get a sense that Jay is a broken, fragile boy.
I just don't think it's right we see each other anymore. I think you're a bit too sensitive for me.
Just, tell me what you want me to be and I'll be exactly that. Just please don't split up with me.
My cock was too big for her.
There's a few very notable scenes in the Inbetweeners show where Jay's dad doesn't just roast him for a bit of banter, but pretty much makes him cry and just says heinous stuff you should not be saying about your kid, let alone to your kid.
You definitely take after your mum in the cock size department. She ain't got one either.
Dad, can you just leave me alone for once?
Make one little joke and he has a shit fit.
These scenes don't feel like they're played for laughs. They go on for so long and hit so hard, you feel like you've just witnessed bullying. There's this great moment where Jay's dad says something along the lines of, "Oh, you say one too many things," and he starts having a sook, just like his mum. It's a good line because it shows how Jay's dad views the world, views the people he cares about as just these sort of people to hang around and be abused by him. Now, as a result of his constant beration from his dad, he obviously then overcompensates, over-exaggerates, and lies about his sexual conquests all the time. That is sort of the core of who Jay is.
That one has fucked everyone. I've slung one up her a few times myself.
Where's your +1 then, Jay?
Not coming. She got a modelling job. Had to fly to Paris.
When do you ever go to London?
All the time. I went last weekend. I fucked some girl up there.
Did you? Where was that then?
It was in the Tower of London.
The Tower of London.
And this comes to an ugly head later in the show when he starts dating a girl. Then when he goes to his dad for very simple relationship advice, basically asking how can I handle my insecurity, his dad basically says you have every reason to be secure, she's gonna leave you, enjoy it while it lasts, which drives Jay to overthink things, and the girl does leave. A self-fulfilling prophecy sort of set up by his dad. It's a very human moment and it really does humanize Jay. And as an audience throughout the rest of the show, you sort of start to forgive and give a lot of free passes to a lot of Jay's less desirable behavior, because at the very least you know where it's coming from. The thing I admire about the movie is it sort of asks us to throw this empathy we've given these characters, particularly Jay, into question when they're paired up with girls that actually see romantic possibilities with them. And it throws into question the way we viewed all these boys' nature throughout the show when we see how these attitudes sort of play out. Jay gets incredibly defensive around his love interest Jane, not only because he's rather interested in her, it's almost just a method to keep up walls. He constantly sort of targets her for being fat. Not only that, but she's an intellectual foil. She will cop these jokes and spit them right back at him. And that's a really interesting dynamic to see play out. She's almost someone who's cut from the same cloth as Jay, and she's ready to almost meet him at his level and get him to grow up to the point where she's grown up due to her various trauma and bullying. It hits critical mass in what is a really hard to watch scene where basically Jay has an opportunity to potentially sleep with Jane, or at the very least skinny dip. And then the fact that 2 bystanders start making fun of her physical appearance throws him enough to ruin a good thing. And I actually think if the movie had the balls to leave it there and that's the last time he gets to be with Jane, I think it would have sent a really powerful message. And in Inbetweeners proper, the way the show used to go, that would have been the end of the story. We've seen time and time again in the show that whenever the characters let their expectations of women or what they expect these women to do sort of overcome rational empathy or just mutual understanding, they get punished pretty much instantly. And I think that's why the show has lasted as long as it has in the cultural zeitgeist. These characters typically pay the price for their attitudes all the time.
Sorry, I was just saying.
Well, don't just say, okay?
I know better than anyone that my penis isn't fucking working.
It's okay.
It's not fucking okay!
Sophie's got weird just like you said he would.
Simon, while having a very empathetic and embarrassing sexual malfunction, then proceeds to sort of lose any semblance of emotional control in front of his partner in a very vulnerable setting, and as a result, she never wants to hear from him again. Jay, throughout the show, alienates and polarizes women that give him any sort of chance. Will lies about Charlotte Hinchcliffe and gets a drink thrown in his face and gets called a nasty little virgin.
No, I'm not a porn star. How many chances do you think you're going to get to be a dickhead, Will? One more? Wrong. You're a nasty little virgin.
These are all moments that serve to ground the characters and their attitudes to women and sort of bring them back down to earth and check their egos. And it's something that these like American frat comedies refuse to do. I think it's where my problems with the first film start to show up, is the fact that there's sort of a lack of consequence that previously in the show there was. Jay fumbles Jane really, really hard. Jane has put up throughout the movie with all his fat jokes, all his shaming, and then his lack of balls to stand by a girl that's interested in him. But then by the end of the movie, she just goes, oh, do you want a blowjob? Like, I'll just go give you one. There's not even a dynamic of like sexual power explored where maybe Jay goes down on her. The writers seem not interested in exploring that idea. Yes, obviously Jay has some boyish charm and he's not past the point of ever being redeemed. There's sort of a lack of being held accountable, and it wraps up a bit too neatly, which is something I miss from the show. It's sort of the bite. I would almost respect the movies more if they just stuck to really seeing these characters' logical conclusions come out. And that's what I find most interesting. I think the idea that them not being able to get away with anything they got away with in high school would be interesting to watch, but this movie feels like it almost wants to reward them. I think Will in the movie is characterized the best. I think he shows a serious amount of substantial character growth that I actually really buy. When I rewatched the show recently, I did notice that Will sort of had a really gross, pervasive sense of like ownership over the women he has any semblance of like sexual contact with.
Who was she then?
Some sort of punky redhead. She was nice. She was mine!
We first see this with Charlotte. Obviously, Will is allowed to be infatuated with Charlotte. And the setup here is that Will starts lying about his body count to impress a girl that he believes is well out of his league.
I've done it with 2 different girls.
Had 11 lovers already.
5 girls, actually.
And as a result, she's expecting him to like lay down the moves and he totally fumbles and then she leaves him. Instead of just copying that L and then take it as a learning experience not to lie to impress women, Will then has this sense of ownership over Charlotte throughout the show that feels really, really uncomfortable. He constantly brags about how he pulled her as a term of social proof. He lies and boasts and brags about how she's actually his girlfriend and like all the crazy sex they do to impress some like local tradies, and then as a result gets very much held accountable. But the thing is, this isn't isolated. We see this issue Will has with ownership over women that he feels like he has a chance with throughout the show. He gets mad at the idea that Neil might have done something with Charlotte, claiming that that's his. But then in the Caravan Club episode, the punky goth chick really wants to sleep with Will. And he basically self-sabotages because he clearly seems nervous and decides to start skidding around with socks. Intentional self-sabotage, whether he knows it or not, showing that he's clearly nervous and in his head about what he's about to do. As a result, she then spends the night having digital sex with Neil in Jay's car, and Will's response here is, "She was mine!
She was mine!
Which speaks to a really seedy way in which Will looks at any women that he has any sexual potential with. We then see him butt heads with Simon over the Irish girl Lauren, and again, it just gets really ugly because a girl sort of smiled to him and talked to him on a bus. She is now his. She can't pursue Simon even though she likes Simon and has made it clear, and Will just continues to sabotage. The thing I admire about this movie is they bring up this dynamic again. This gorgeous blonde girl that's clearly quite out of his league shows interest in him, and then he tries to sort of talk her out of being in a relationship with someone who she describes as incredibly romantic and sexually fulfilling. So why would she want to give that up for Will?
Feisty one you are! Feisty one you are!
I think what Will gets taught here is sort of just being patient and understanding. He's constantly put in place by this woman, and she berates him even after the boyfriend ends up cheating on her. The message that she gives to Will is sort of this idea of waiting and being patient. She says to him like, oh, if you're a virgin in a year, I'll have sex with you, providing I'm not with my boyfriend. It's a really good way to take Will's character arc and how he's previously engaged with women to like its logical conclusion of like, well, now I'm asking you to be patient, to wait with no real promise that I'll be there unless I'm not with a partner. It sets up an interesting idea as to whether Will would actually be respectful enough to her to not pressure her and let that year play out and then check in after a year, or whether he would just pester her and pester her and pester her and sort of try to coerce her. Again, the issue is the way the movie wraps up is she just goes, actually, instead of waiting a year to have sex, how about I have sex with you all year? It feels like it's coming from a place where dumb bro American comedies are made, where at the end they just fucking bang all the chicks. It's like, why? Next we get to Simon. Now again, I think they explore Simon's themes well. Simon's theme is obviously he's always in love with Carly. And side note, I do think it is with genuine romantic intentions. Carly, unlike a lot of the female characters, actually actively exhibits some pretty toxic traits. She very, very frequently and heavily uses Simon as a rebound, knowing how he feels about her, and consistently leads him on. She just does this to get very easy validation when she needs it, only to go back to Tom every season. And then in the movie, she does this with Simon again. She breaks up with him after finally giving him a relationship.
Plus, I'm going on holiday soon, so there's that.
Why? What are you planning to do on holiday?
Maybe you should just go home. I just need some space to think at the moment.
Okay, fine. So I'll see you later, yeah?
And then starts banging that guy we talked about before. And then the moment he breaks her heart, she tries to get Simon to basically kiss her to make this guy jealous. While a bit over the top and sort of saying the quiet part out loud, which I don't think we needed said out loud, I think this feels like a fairly logical conclusion and extension to what we saw in the show. My issue here is Simon essentially spends the whole movie doing what Carly is doing to him to this other innocent girl. Time and time and time and time again, and she keeps giving him chances. And there's this great sort of punchline where she goes, if Carly really means that much to you, please take my ticket to the boat party. And he just like runs off and yanks it. And that's a really funny joke. That's a really funny joke. That's almost acknowledging Simon is broken. He's not going to change. We know he's a shit character, but here's a good joke from it. But then what do? He swims over to her and they have a loving relationship, at least for a week. There's a few issues I have with this conclusion here. One, him swimming back after taking the ticket completely undermines sort of the typical movie arc joke that they pulled off there. On top of that, I don't like the idea that she forgives him after the beach thing. I feel like after the beach thing, you really can't come back from that, or he really needed to be held accountable, but she's just so overly forgiving, along with all these other women. On top of that, that forgiving nature that we see there, which we could see as really sweet, is completely shot into the floor and set on fire. I could forgive her for giving Simon if it was truly a thing of she sees the best in him and they have a loving relationship after. But the worst part is then in the sequel, they make her a cartoonishly over-the-top toxic girlfriend.
Where have you been? Haven't heard from you in days.
I've been on a plane. Look, I wanted to say...
Will you marry me?
What was that?
No, what it was. No, wait a minute, Lucy.
What? What?
Which doesn't seem like it was in the realm of any sort of possibility. In the previous scenes we had with her, she was shown to be incredibly patient, incredibly kind, and incredibly fragile. It's a pretty egregious thing they do with Neil. Now, Neil has this joke throughout the movie where basically he cheats on his girlfriend, but he justifies it as not cheating. And these excuses range from, it's just kissing, all good, it's just finger stuff, all good, it's just dancing, everyone loves my dancing, all good, we had sex, but it was just the tip. And this joke kind of keeps escalating and escalating. And it's quite a funny bit, right? It shows how Neil sort of sees the world and just doesn't even give much thought to anything. And everyone just goes, well, if you believe that, sure.
It's all right, boys. Kitty don't bite. Not now she's been fed. Hey, lover?
What the fuck was that?
We take Neil's cheating from that in the early scenes to then him actively lying and like gaslighting at the end of the movie. And I think the thing is, Neil is shown throughout the show to be incredibly dumb. Like just beyond stupid. But at the same time, he's almost definitely the nicest and kindest of the four guys. You sort of start to get why he is the most successful with women out of the show. And he doesn't even have the intelligence to have really nasty, pervasive, misogynistic thoughts. He sort of just goes, I think I just want to have sex.
You're not a virgin anymore.
Don't think so.
Nice one, mate.
And he's sort of just influenced by the people around him. The issue that I have with Neil's arc at the end is he is very much just comic relief. It's very cartoonishly and over the top, right? Like his girlfriend literally looks like him. She is also similarly low IQ and they laugh at the same dumb jokes. They don't have too many brain cells to rub together. Let's just say that. At the end of the movie, even though she words it like a child, she basically does ask him, hey, what about your girlfriend? This feels wrong. I don't want to sleep with you or make out with you when you've got a girlfriend. And he basically lies and gaslights gaslights and says that like he hasn't had a girlfriend this whole trip. And then she goes, oh, okay, let's make out. Not only does he lie, but then he makes this like alpha quip, almost like high-fiving himself for getting away with lying to her.
I just think this is wrong. I feel bad for your girlfriend.
Oh, this is fine, and if you want, we can even kiss.
Oh, Neil. Is that true? Really?
Yeah, of course. If you like.
And it just spits in the face of everything we've seen from Neil so far. Now, you can say I'm overthinking the Inbetweeners, but I think the show and the movies at times are smart enough to sort of know better. As I mentioned, the show has a lot of very, very dark character moments that really want us to question why we encourage these characters to be the way they are. Going so far as to suggest in the final episode that not only has Jay been sent to a shrink due to his sexual proclivities, but they also infer in a line of dialogue that he may be also sexually traumatized.
It's not that game you used to play with your weird neighbour in his shed, is it?
Well, that never happened.
Yeah, you told me about it years ago, just after he moved away.
No, I never. Shut your knob.
You're sick, son. Your mum was right about sending you to that shrink.
So I don't think I'm going too far to read into this show a bit. And I think the disappointing thing about this movie is, despite some of the great comedic set pieces, and there are some, I think it just kind of undermines the characters a bit. However, in saying that, despite how I don't like the resolutions to pretty much any of these female arcs with the Inbetweeners, I do like the journey to get there. It's my main contention for this first movie is the moments where it works are essentially these moments where the boys still feel like the same boys from the show we saw.
Of course it's not the bath, you fucking idiot. There's the bath there. That's the kids' toilet.
Is it?
Yes.
Why's it got a plug hole and a tap then?
Because it's for checking your kid's shit before you flush it.
Oh, that's grim.
Yeah, I know. That's the Continentals, innit? They're dirty.
Where it starts to lose its way is when it leans into more American comedy tendencies. You can see this mostly in the posters that were used for the marketing of this movie. It suddenly shifted from a show that views these characters as losers, characters whose behavior should be condemned and put into question. Whereas I feel like when this movie needed to be marketed to international audiences, they sort of tried to market the Inbetweeners as sort of an American Pie type situation, where basically these main characters are the heroes and they should achieve their goal of getting laid. While the characters in the show always ogled and obsessed with women, the show itself never really went to massive efforts to glamorize these women or objectify them in any way. A lot of the shot composition in the show was awkward and clunky and felt cold and miserable and low budget, like their surroundings. You look at the posters as well as how this movie frames their interactions with women and just partying in general, and it does look like it's really trying to glamorize and glorify. I feel like the spirit of the show, where they are kind of the butt of the joke, got lost here.
Will, stop.
Getting a bit weird now.
I don't like it when he makes eye contact.
None of us do, Neil.
And on top of that, I feel like the show did a better job of showing why they were friends, how unifying their bond was, whereas in the movie where they've all had their hair and makeup done and they're shot on 4K cameras, all of a sudden all their quippy banter at each other just starts to feel a bit mean. This reaches ahead in the second movie. Now, the first movie definitely was a mixed bag and had a lot of problems, however, it still had enough jokes to get by. The dance sequence is iconic. And I think the shit snorting scene is genuinely a well thought out set piece. Feels very in line with something we would have seen in the show. When we get to Inbetweeners 2, however, it should have been a slam dunk. They went to Australia, that could have made for some really fun cultural clash comedy. But unfortunately, it feels like the writers are just out of jokes here, and these characters are getting old. And as a result, seeing these characters outside of high school starting to actually show their age, it starts to get a bit depressing rather than funny. And on top of that, this movie kind of doesn't have a plot. It is really thinly veiled, because at this point, the characters all have had sex and have had girlfriends, and this movie just reeks of lazy writing in every corner. First off, none of the girlfriends from the first movie are given any explanation as to why they're not here, except for Jane. And she is kind of the main driving point / plot device of this film. Basically, the plot here is Jay sends them a letter telling them how awesome his life is now that he's moved to Australia.
No, just got an email from Jay.
No way.
Wait, listen to this. Dear Neil, you fucking weapon.
As you know, I'm on a mental gap here in Australia. am now their premier #1 DJ. I make love to them with the technique I like to call the one-pump orgasm. Basically, everything's better than when I was with Jane, who, as I mentioned, I no longer think about.
And it turns out his life is actually shit and he just wants to get back with Jane. I think the plot from there is that Will wants to sightsee Australia and Jay wants to go to Splash Planet, an Australian water park. The big sort of driving thing of this movie is they go to a water park, shenanigans ensue. The writers seem to run out of ideas and then the last 20-30 minutes are just devoted to the Inbetweeners thinking they're going to die in a desert. It's really bizarre. Most egregious mistakes in this movie, as I mentioned before, Simon's girlfriend becomes cartoonishly over the top toxic to the point where the joke isn't even funny.
Swear on your hoodie you're not going to cheat on me. I just love you so much.
Underwritten, it's poorly handled, and again, it feels like a really lazy American comedy rather than the genius writing we got in the TV show of The Inbetweeners. All the girlfriends are gone, so that whole interesting plot with Will in the first movie about he can either wait a year to have sex or have sex all year isn't really answered. We assume he's had sex at this point. We assume all of them have had sex at this point. But for some reason, this show and this movie that really hyped up their pursuit to lose their virginities doesn't seem to care anymore. On top of that, they just sort of take every joke too far. I think the only point where this movie is really working is the opening 10 to 12 minutes where it just feels like The Boys again.
That's it, sir. Wash your fingers for the mingers. No splash, no gash, no Armani, no Panani, no Dolce & Gabbana, no Sucky or Banana.
Jay! Jay!
And then it gets really bogged down in all these side characters, all these attacks on Australian culture, which I'm down for if they're funny, but they aren't particularly funny. And a plot with Simon's girlfriend that is just painfully contrived.
Last, where have you been? Haven't heard from you in days.
I've been on a plane. Look, I wanted to say...
Will you marry me?
What was that?
No, what it was.
Simon?
No, what it was...
Say it again.
What, will you marry me? No, wait a minute, Lucy.
What? What? Where's my phone? What are you doing?
Congratulations, mate.
Over the top, stupid, contrived, and as a result, the whole movie, he basically is just worried that he's going to get married to a girl that he doesn't want to get married. It's like, just break up with her. Just don't marry her. It's not that hard. Simon previously has always been a bit silly.
I'm gonna fuck your fucking fanny off, you twat!
Okay.
But he's never been downright stupid. Neil has always been dim, but in this movie they make him genuinely like just beyond repair. There's a decent joke where he looks at the Sydney Harbour Bridge and goes, what the fuck is that? That's all the joke needed to be. His ignorance is enough. But then they take it so far as for him to genuinely believe that the Sydney Opera House is a spaceship, and then 2 seconds later he smashes his phone. The writing just falls apart in this movie. On top of that, we get to see Jay's fantasy version of what his life looks like now just play out. They clearly spent a lot of the budget on this sequence. And while there's a lot of cute, funny visual gags, I'll be honest, I don't laugh at anything in this sequence nearly as much as how I used to laugh at Jay when he used to just lie and exaggerate.
Wank you off with clogs.
Nah, look, it was properly filthy. I shouldn't tell. Try us. All right. Well, when I fingered her, she shit down my arm. One bent over the table here. There was one up here who I was fingering, and I was just toe fucking the one on the floor. Oh, I'm gonna have to go. I've got this call from Ralph Lauren. Nah, cow. It charged me, so I had to knock it out. One punch.
Nice.
What made those scenes so funny in the show is that even though it was so clearly bullshit, it worked because he believed it. He so clearly wanted everyone around to believe it that you almost started to feel like he believed his lies.
On holiday in Spain one year, me and my mate took a peddler out and we went to Africa.
Do you think you could spare us the bullshit for 1 minute while I try to figure out how not to die at sea?
Whereas in this sequence where they're reading the letter, yes, it's obviously meant to visualize what is in the letter, but it just isn't that funny, unfortunately. This movie does explore friendship dynamics well in parts. I think both movies have really good conflicts. I do like in the first movie when Jay rips up the boat party tickets, you get where those emotions are coming from. The fact that they come back together after that is actually genuinely nice. In this second movie, Will essentially gets caught up chasing after another blonde girl, fucking again, but this time it's someone he apparently knew from his private school days.
I don't think you
get it, but that's cool.
No, I get it all right, you patronising cow.
The thing I like about this plot is, at the very least, it does actually bring something out of Simon. They clash heads over this because the rest of the Inbetweeners feel like Will is abandoning them, and he has a similar freak out to what Simon had at the end of season 3, basically saying, you guys are all holding me back.
Grow up, Simon. You grow up. I am grown up. You should grow up. Really? Grow up? I am. You're not. So grow up. I was grown up. Grow up. Yeah, you should. We'll see who's grown up, won't we? Grow up. Grow up. Oh, grow up. Grow up.
So the dramatic moments here for the most part work. Where it doesn't work is when they spend 20 minutes in the desert basically convincing us as an audience that they're going to die. It's really, really bizarre, and then they don't die. They get saved by Deus Ex Jane. Again, another movie-level contrivance. The show just never had these contrivances. It never wanted to engage in this sort of stuff, and it's really disappointing to see these characters that were so well written in a show be sort of brought down to, again, American comedy tendencies. And another egregious example of this American comedy tendency, aside from Simon's girlfriend, is the joke that Mr. Gilbert is sleeping with Miss Mackenzie.
When a man loves a lady very much, blood rushes to the genital area, enlarging significantly the penis. Or in this case, my penis.
Now, this was a funny sort of threat that Mr. Gilbert threw out at Will during his school days. There was a joke he made where he went, "Oh, is your mum internet dating? I believe she is very much my type." Obviously, Mr. Gilbert isn't the most attractive man in the world, and Will's mum is quite attractive. So the joke works. It's just him trying to get a rise out of Will. But I think this movie couldn't help itself and decides, nah, fuck it. They will date. And it's just something that doesn't make any sense. The scenes we've seen with Will's mum and Mr. Gilbert show that they really don't connect or get along properly.
I was hoping you'd be able to do something about it, Mr. Gilbert.
I'm sorry.
I don't think he said anything, Kevin.
Oh, come on, we both know Will. He must have said something.
He had to walk back through the town centre sopping wet and barely clothed, Mr. Gilbert. I'd hoped you'd take this more seriously.
Mr. Gilbert doesn't seem to take her or her son seriously. I don't think the juice was worth the squeeze. I don't think the joke was worth sabotaging what we've seen from the show. And I think that's the thing with these movies. The first one feels like a nice sort of swan song, but then this movie reopens the characters to leave them in a worse spot. At the end of this movie, there is no resolution. You need a third movie, or you need a follow-up season or something, because the way it ends is they just kind of get home and then drive off, and then there's an after credits sequence where they go to, I think, Thailand and sleep with transsexual women. It's just not a particularly funny joke, and on top of that, it hasn't really rounded off the characters at all. I think the end of the third season, the end of the show, did actually round these characters off well. It showed that they're always going to care for each other, they're always going to get along. Even if Simon leaves, Will be taken care of, they all sort of start to connect, and it shows that they're always going to be friends at least somewhat, and if not, they at least got each other through their high school days. And I think the thing that these movies rob the show is a concrete ending for these characters. It shows this young set of friends leave school only to just sort of go around in circles, and then the movies just kind of end. And I just find them really bizarre, because you see moments in both movies where they're firing on all cylinders. I will have to give credit to the second movie. The actual sequences in the Australian water park, the 30-minute section in this hour-and-a-half movie, is actually quite good. It is full of good comedic set pieces. I like Neil feeding the dolphin a burger and resulting in the dolphin dying. I like Jay, for no good reason, calling Simon a child creep and then getting him beat up.
So sorry if the kids are bothering you.
Oh, God, no, of course not. No, not at all. I love kids.
He's a pedophile.
That feels like an Inbetweeners show joke, and I love the sequence of Neil taking a poop on a water slide and then it hitting Will, and then Will vomiting in the pool.
But it's not bowels, they're disabled. Oh, no.
While this poo vomit sequence is way over the top compared to the show and requires way more budget and just doesn't feel like the show at all, it feels appropriate. It feels like an appropriate extension of what we saw in the show. We had the gags where Neil pisses the bed or the boys puke at the end of season 3, and as a result, this feels like a natural extension, and it feels like they're using their budget appropriately. However, I think the issue is the second movie particularly writes these characters poorly compared to the show. And I think it does tarnish the legacy of the show, unfortunately, because now you can't watch the show without going, oh, we better watch the movies. And then every time you watch the movies, you're sort of sitting there going, oh, I wish we were watching the show. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. I haven't seen many good videos about these two movies and where they succeeded and where they failed. Let me know what you'd like me to talk about next. And thank you so much for watching. Have a lovely day.